Let me introduce you to today's speaker, Anna Maki, who's Director of Program Services. Good morning, Anna.
Good morning. Thanks for having me this morning. So, today we're going to talk about handling Social Security overpayments. And how I got into working with overpayments is as a byproduct of helping people with benefits acquisition. So, BDI has had a benefits navigation program since 2016. This is our own program. It's sort of a grassroots, homegrown program whereby we have provided a lot of support to families, primarily in acquiring benefits, but also once you have secured those benefits, we are also a work incentive planning and assistance provider. So, we've got a wonderful program here, very unique um, offering by BDI to be able to provide supports to families. So great opportunity for us to be here today. So let's talk about this. This is one of my most frequently asked questions. I go to my mailbox and I get this letter, security, and my heart stops because I'm basically being advised two things. First, that Social Security has overpaid me. And secondly, they want the money back. So, yikes. So what we're going to do in our session today is talk about what that process looks like. I really want to spend quite a bit of time talking about how to avoid being in an overpayment situation, and then what do you do if you find yourself in the middle of one. So basically, an overpayment is simply Social Security saying, when we sent you that check last month, you really weren't entitled to that check, so we want it back. And what happens is anytime somebody has been determined ineligible, and there's a lot of different reasons why you might be determined ineligible to receive that check, it's going to accrue over time. So let's say you first became ineligible of last year. So all of those months from May of last year till now, till Social Security became aware, oops, you're actually not eligible. All of those months are going to be overpayment months. And that's why you see sometimes really high amounts. I think some of the cases that we've managed have been as low as $5,000. Okay. But even $5,000 is a lot of money, but I think the highest one has been over $60,000. So if you're getting a letter that's asking you to pay $60,000 back, that's frightening. Like, what do you even do with that? So that's why it's so important, again, first of all, to understand what it is and how it came about, how to prevent it in the future. But then, is there any way that we can fix it? Is there any way that we can cure that and make that overpayment go away? So that's what we're going to work on today. So just to let you know, overpayments occur both with SSI and SSDI. They're actually more common under SSI, but the amounts are usually much lower with SSI. SSDI, little less frequently, but a lot easier to get into a super large overpayment. So the thing about overpayments is that Social Security absolutely 100% expects to be repaid. And they're basically going to say, hey, well, you need to write us a check and send that next month. Thank you. And that's not always realistic, especially when we have such large numbers of that overpayment. So one of the things that's important for you to be aware of is that you have some redress. Just because you've gotten this overpayment letter and that Social Security says that they expect this payment doesn't mean that you don't have an opportunity to explain things or an opportunity to request a waiver of that overpayment. And so that's a two-step process that we're going to deep dive into. Is first, how do you appeal? And secondly, how do you request the waiver of that overpayment? So, how did this even happen? Right? The most common reason that people get into overpayment situations is because they haven't reported their work earnings. And this is a very, very common misconception. It's like, okay, I'm paying taxes, so the IRS knows what I'm earning. So if the IRS knows what I'm earning, Social Security should know what I'm earning because I'm paying taxes into Social Security. So don't they communicate? Short answer, no, they really don't communicate. So even if you are filing taxes and doing everything you're supposed to on that side of the house, you still have to report your Social Security earnings. And the best way to report Social Security earnings is monthly, each month, preferably before the 10th of each month. So how do you report your earnings? There's a number of different ways to report earnings. If you have a myssa.gov account, you can report your earnings online. You can call in your earnings or you can mail in. I end up using snail mail for my son. He has SSI. He's working. He's a BDI employee. Woohoo! So we have to report those earnings. But because he has impairment related work expenses, we have to submit that either in person or in the mail. You can't submit impairment related work expenses on an app. This is a big failing of the system and one of the reasons why people can easily fall into this overpayment trap. So number one way to prevent overpayments is making sure that you're reporting those earnings each month. Another real common way in which people get into an overpayment situation is when they're not keeping their eye on the ball. This is particularly true with SSI. As you know, in Georgia, SSI is automatically tied to Medicaid. So that means that you have to maintain Medicaid eligibility while you're receiving SSI benefits. And one of the requirements of Medicaid eligibility is you can't have more than $2,000 in resources. So it's very common that people just kind of take their eyes off that ball. And over a period of time, and this is how, again, those overpayments accrue. Let's say, again, last summer, your total resources were over $2,000, meaning that you have both a checking account and a savings account, and they're over $2,000. Or let's say you even have one account and it's got $2,001 in it, so it's not over by a lot. It doesn't matter. If it's over by $1, it's exceeding that requirement, and that means that you're going to have to pay that money back. So each month that account was over $2,000, it's a month that Social Security is going to look back and go, you need to send us back that SSI check. Ouch. So always make sure, if you're a representative payee, that you're monitoring that bank account to ensure that it doesn't go over $2,000. Under SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance, typically people are going to get into an overpayment situation because they're working, which is a good thing, but they're working over the substantial gainful activity level. And sometimes, especially if we're not reporting those earnings, Social Security is not aware that you're earning at that level. So they're continuing to send your check each month, right? This is how we get pretty high overpayment amounts, because that's the whole total of your SSDI check each month. Whereas SSI is a monthly calculation, SSDI is that whole payment there. So if let's assume you're working and you have gone through your trial work period, no issues there. But following that 9 months of a trial work period, you're entering a 36-month period of extended period of eligibility. So what that means is when you're in that extended period of eligibility, Social Security is going to be looking at your earnings each month, and it's going to say, are you above or below substantial gainful activity? And if you're below substantial gainful activity, then you get your SSDI check and your earnings. If you're working over substantial gainful activity while you're in that extended period of eligibility, you're not entitled to that SSDI check. And so Social Security is going to expect that money back. So you can see, if you are getting a double whammy where you're not reporting the work earnings and your work substantial gainful activity. Do you really think Social Security is all caught up? They are not. They are actually at their lowest point of having employees and being properly staffed than they've ever been. So they're severely understaffed. They're behind the eight ball. So what's going to happen is by the time they finally review your case, you could be in a overpayment situation for up to really a couple of years. So this is where it gets really, really scary. Um, does Social Security bear some burden of, hey, you should have let us know? You could argue that, and that can be something that you would include in the appeal. Hey, Social Security, y'all supposed to help me with this and review this and let me know earlier before I get into such a significant overpayment. So that's certainly an argument. But the best thing to do is to prevent this from ever happening by making sure that you're always reporting your work earnings and being aware of what the rules and guidelines are. So if you have SSDI, you know that substantial gainful activity amount is 1,470. It's going to change in January, but for this year, gross earnings 1,470. If I cross over that line, I'm going to be in an overpayment situation, right? Or could be in an overpayment situation if I take that check. What do we tell people to do when they're aware of that? We say, hang on to it or send that check back, right? Because they're going to be coming after it later on. Just because Social Security has deposited it in your Social Security account doesn't necessarily mean that you're entitled to it. That's the kicker here. Another reason that overpayments occur, we see benefits overlap frequently when an individual is going from supplemental security income to Social Security disability insurance. And so typically what happens is you start with SSI, la 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 la, you're getting your SSI every month, do, and then you're becoming eligible for SSDI. Let's say your parent has retired, and so it's an adult dependent child, and so now they're eligible for SSDI. So they're going to look. Remember when you got SSI, how they gave you a back pay from the to account for all the months in which your application was pending because the award goes from the date of application, right? So same thing with SSDI. So if you've been receiving SSI all this time and then you're awarded SSDI, because it takes so much time, there's that period in which you were actually eligible and should have been receiving SSDI, and there's an overlap, right? So you should have been receiving SSDI and SSI. So it can get kind of tricky. And what we have to look at is having you be familiar with what the rules are so that you know if you have SSI, you can be concurrent with SSDI, but you're not going to get your full SSI and your SSDI. They're going to deduct the SSI from your SSDI award, right? So that's where the overpayment comes in. If you've been receiving SSI all these months and then also eligible for SSDI, and they're going to have that back payment for SSDI, they've got to subtract that SSI money, but that can also result in an overpayment. So lots of reasons why we can get into overpayments. And the best thing that you can do, again, is to be familiar with your rules. Make sure that you have access to the Social Security Red Book. The Social Security Red Book is a wonderful tool and resource that you can review to make sure that you have awareness of what these rules are. But the most important thing is make sure that you're reporting those earnings. So, some things to be aware of. First, and I'm going to just beat that dead horse. Report those work earnings each month. That's going to be very, very important. Make sure that you're familiar with the rules, and the rules are different. If you have SSI versus SSDI, there's different work incentives, there's different programs, so they work differently. So make sure you know what type of benefit that you have, and that benefit title is going to be in in any correspondence. If you have any correspondence from Social Security, you can look in the upper left-hand corner. It's going to say this is for supplemental security income, or this is retirement survivors benefits, right? So know what program you're in and know what those are. There are different work incentive programs like impairment related work expenses. So impairment related work expenses are most frequently used under SSI, but they can also be used in SSDI when you are at that point where you're crossing over into substantial gainful activity. What is an impairment related work expense? So this is basically Social Security's equivalent of a tax deduction. You know how you file your taxes and these little deductions that you can take, little itemized deductions. So this kind of works a little bit similarly. So in an impairment related work expense, it's in the title, right? It has to be impairment related. In other words, something tied to your disabling condition, and it has to be an expense related to work. So the most common impairment work expenses are medications that you're paying out of pocket for, transportation costs, getting to and from work, not general transportation like community access, but just to and from work because it's a work expense, right? So if you have to pay Lyft or Uber or you use a MARTA card, those are impairment related work expenses for transportation that you can deduct from your SSI each month, or if you have SSDI and you're crossing over substantial gainful activity, you can use impairment related work expenses then. Because SSDI is not a monthly calculation, we usually use impairment related work expenses until that point in time when you're coming close or have gently crossed over that substantial gainful activity line. So if you're earning over 1470, let's say if you're earning 1500, okay, you're over SGA, but you've got $50 worth of transportation expenses you can deduct, then suddenly you're back below substantial gainful activity level. So those impairment related work expenses can be very important in helping prevent an overpayment situation because you are not going over that, you're not going over the substantial gainful activity level. The other thing that you would want to look at, and this is primarily if you have SSDI, is that you want to show that there are special conditions or some type of job subsidy. So this is very frequent when I have an individual who has worked over substantial gainful activity. So let's say again, they're earning $1,500, $2,000 a month, okay? So gross earnings. Well, that's over substantial gainful activity, right? But if they have a job coach, or if the employer is making a lot of accommodations for that individual, if you can document that and show Social Security, look, there are special conditions such that the value of the work is actually less than substantial gainful activity. Because here's the thing, substantial gainful activity, it's supposed to be a value. It's not supposed to be a number. It's treated like a number, but it's supposed to be a value. And what that means is if you have a job coach or other special conditions, then the actual value, even though the amount is over 1470, the actual value is less than 1470, and therefore you're not working over substantial gainful activity, and therefore you have not, you shouldn't be responsible for that overpayment. So that's a little tricky to show. The burden of proof is on you to show that there are special conditions or some level of job subsidy there. Social Security has forms that they have the employer complete to confirm that and try to place a value on what that accommodation is. Absent that, then yeah, you're going to pickle, because if you're over substantial gainful activity, you're simply over substantial gainful activity. So again, just be mindful of what these rules are to help prevent those overpayments from happening. So you're in a pickle. You've gotten that letter and it's requesting all this money back. Pretty much with any decision that you have from Social Security, there's an opportunity to appeal that decision. And so, in situations involving overpayments, it's really two things that we're doing. We want to appeal the decision, but we also want to request a waiver of that overpayment. So the first thing that we want to do is appeal the decision. And especially we want to appeal the decision if we think that decision is wrong. Like, whoa, 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 I don't know where you got that. That's not true. If there's something inaccurate in their determination, then that's a huge reason why we would want to go to this request for reconsideration. So the request for reconsideration, this is form SSA 561. It's a very straightforward form, and you can see you would put name of claimant, that's the individual receiving Social Security, their Social Security number, claim number if it's on that paperwork, otherwise you can leave that blank. What's the issue being appealed? The issue being appealed is the request for an overpayment. So we are appealing the fact that you have received this request to send money back. So the issue being appealed is an overpayment. I do not agree with the Social Security Administration's determination and request reconsideration. My reasons are, so this is your opportunity to state why this is inaccurate. One of the things that I really encourage people to do, if it's possible, is to try to fix the situation. And we want to be able to document that. So we want to state that, this is inaccurate information because impairment related work expenses weren't considered, or there may be other miscalculations. In one situation, we had that SSI SSDI overlap, and Social Security wanted it both ways. They wanted to withhold the money, but then they also wanted to have the individual pay it back. I'm like, okay, Social Security, pick one. You can either withhold it or have us pay it back, but you can't do both. So depending on the situation, you really want to help Social Security correct the record. And that's a really important note, because I think we tend to assume that Social Security has the right information, right? We look at that and it's like, okay, it's coming from Social Security, it must be right, right? Not necessarily. What we're finding is that there's actually a fair amount of misinformation with Social Security, where information hasn't been reported correctly, and it's just kind of gone sideways. So one of the things that we encourage folks to do is to, as part of this appeal process, is you're basically saying, my reasons are Social Security has miscalculated my earnings, right? So then the burden of proof is going to fall on you to show that miscalculation, right? So what can you do to show that? What you can do is create your own documentation, right? You're the worker, so you're going to have copies of your pay stubs. So having all of that documentation available is very essential. Requesting a benefits planning query from Social Security is another good way to see, like, what does Social Security think that I have versus what have I really earned? On a benefits planning query, that's basically a 2 or 3 page document. It's going to talk about, when you were first awarded this benefit. And frequently, if you've been reporting the earnings, at the bottom of it, it's going to have all of the earnings reported that you can then cross-reference and reconcile. Say, okay, these are my actual pay stubs, and this is what Social Security has. Is this a match? So it gives you an opportunity to reconcile that information. So again, in the reconsideration, it's very straightforward. It's just, what are we appealing? And then what are the reasons why? And then you have this section in the middle there. And that this part, hold on, let me just Let's scroll back up. Right. So you need to check a box here. Which box are you completing? If this is an SSDI appeal, you leave this section blank. If this is SSI, you're checking case review. Okay. Then the contact information is just the claimant's signature or the representative pays information. That's it. It's a real simple form, but it's an important form, and they're not going to process an appeal without this form. So make sure that you're utilizing this form. Let's go to the next one. So again, with regard to when do you use that request for reconsideration, you're going to use that request for reconsideration anytime you disagree with Social Security's determination. That always is going to come first. So generally, and if you read through all the rules, you can do the request for reconsideration separate from request for waiver of overpayment recovery, or you can do them both concurrently. And I generally just have people do it at the same time. Generally, you do the request for reconsideration if you think it's inaccurate, and then they want the request for waiver if you're not disputing the overpayment, but you can't pay it back. So in either case, we really don't want to pay this money back because that's going to put us in a situation of financial hardship to pay this money back. So we have to complete the request for waiver of overpayment recovery. So it's a two-step process: the request for reconsideration plus this request for the waiver of the overpayment. Now, this is going to be a little longer to fill out, and it's going to feel a little intrusive. And if you're the rep payee and you're talking about the claimant, who is the individual receiving Social Security, when you start getting into a lot of this information, you're really trying to limit it only to that person's resources and assets and whatnot. Basically, you're making the claim to Social Security like, okay, even if it's been found that I've gone over, maybe it's because I've gone over activity, maybe because I wasn't reporting my work earnings on time. I get it. You want to complete a statement that's basically to that effect, okay, now I understand the rules. I have a benefits counselor. I understand the rules. So I know how to report my earnings now. So we're never going to do this again, right? But for this time, can't you give me a warning? It's kind of like, I really feel this request for waiver, it feels a lot like traffic court. How many of y'all have ever, you were speeding, right? And you get a ticket and you go to traffic court, and because you showed up, the judge drops the points or lowers the fine. So this is pretty much the same principle. A lot of people get into an overpayment situation. They never show up to request that overpayment. So go through all the processes, use your due process, do that request for reconsideration, do this request for a waiver of overpayment. The answer to every unasked question is no. So if you don't ask, you're going to have to pay it back. If you're asking for the overpayment, you got a decent chance of having that amount waived, especially if you can show financial hardship. So we're going to just walk through this overpayment questionnaire a little bit. So the first section is the identifying information. That's just like, who are we talking about? Who's the person that got overpaid? And are you helping this person? So who are you? So they're trying to figure out who's doing what here. As a general rule, anytime that you are appealing any decision with Social Security, think about this, poor person, underpaid, understaffed, overwhelmed. They don't know what's going on. Always make sure that you copy the letter that you received and you send that letter with this appeal, right? That way they can go, oh, they're responding to this letter. Got it. It's just going to help them connect the dots easier. That's what we want. To make it easier for Social Security. So what are we doing? We're section 2 is this waiver request. And so you can see it is the total amount less than $1,000. If it's less than $1,000, they're pretty much going to write it off. Sometimes I've had at least one person, um, they came after them for $79. I'm like, okay, they're serious about this. So it just depends on the situation. So there's that opportunity of, potential write off if it's a low amount. What's your reason for requesting a waiver? And this check all that apply, that's an important note because it's not your fault and you can't afford to pay the money back, or it's unfair for other reasons. What might be another reason that it's unfair? It might be unfair because this has gone on for so long. It's like, where was, you're coming out, it's been 3 years, where were you in this process? Come on, work with me here. Maybe, wasn't my fault because I didn't know all the rules. And they always say ignorance is not an excuse, but it kind of sort of is, right? Especially if you are showing that you're taking measures to correct anything. So check all that apply. Please provide the date of the notice for the overpayment that you're asking us to waive. This is why having a letter is so important. So you can basically reference that letter. This letter was dated, June 3rd. Are you requesting that we waive the entire overpayment, including money that you've already paid back to us? Yes, we want to waive the entire overpayment. Um, and then number 5, tell us what you know about why the overpayment might have happened. Was there a reason that you didn't understand or you weren't able to change the report? Explain why. And so this is your opportunity. And look how you only get a little bit of information there on a small block. There's another form that we'll show you too that you can make a statement to Social Security that if you want to have, a longer opportunity to kind of state your case. But basically, this would be, I wasn't aware that I needed to report my earnings, or I thought that I had reported my earnings because I was filing my taxes and I thought that was enough. And, I didn't understand the rules. So here we are. So something along those lines of helping to explain how you got into that overpayment situation. Let's look at section 3, the needs-based income. Are you currently receiving SSI? If you got SSI, this would put yes. If you are receiving SSDI, you would check no. And if yes, you go to page 9, and if no, complete the rest of the form. So the question 7, a dependent is a person who depends on you for support whom you can claim on your tax return. Are you or any dependent household member currently receiving any of the following? So they're trying to figure out here, it's basically rooting out whether or not you have the ability to pay back, right? So if you have SSI, SSI is needs-based. You can't have more than $2,000 in resources with SSI. So it's going to be really hard for anybody who has SSI to pay any overpayment back, right? SSDI could be a different story. Let's look at section 4, members of the household. So if you are the parent representative payee, you want to be mindful of, you don't want it to look like the claimant is like, you don't want to look like y'all are combining your income. Okay. So this is for the spouse and dependents. So if you're the representative payee, you see section 4, members of household, I should put my information here. No, you shouldn't, because you're the parent rep payee. This is if the claimant, the adult dependent child, has children or a spouse. So just make sure you're reading these sections really super carefully. Let's skip down to section 5, assets, things you have and own. This is where Social Security is kind of beating around the bush, to figure out how much resources you have. Again, the core issue is, can you pay them back? So if you're the rep payee, you're not putting your stuff in there. If you have a special needs trust, you're going to note this is a special needs trust, so this exempt. We don't touch the special needs trust. We're only looking at checking accounts, bank accounts, things like that. Saving, like a general savings account, not an ABLE account or a special needs trust. Feels kind of invasive because they want to see how much money you got. But again, they're trying to determine, can you pay them back? So they're trying to look to see, what assets do you have? Do you co-own any real estate? Do you have any business interests? So a lot of this stuff is going to be nope, nope, nope. Monthly household income. Again, you're talking about this from the perspective of the claimant. So you want to put that information in there. It would be the claimant's dependents, not you as a representative talking about the adult dependent child. That's where sometimes people go sideways with these forms. So it's just think about it in terms of the claimant. Let's keep scrolling down. They're looking for any sources of income from anywhere. So generally, we don't have a lot of other income, but we also get to chart expenses. So this is where you're basically able to show much money I get. This is kind of why I need my SSDI check, right? Because I'm trying to pay, my fair share of all these other bills. And at the end of the day, I don't have a lot of discretionary income. So that's something that we want to show. The remarks section is basically your statement of financial hardship. It's like, look, this is what my life is like. This is why I need the Social Security benefits. This is how it's going to negatively impact me. It's like a statement of impact here. And that's pretty much it. It's a fairly straightforward. It's a little invasive, but and here they want they want you to sign, like, is this true? Like, under penalty of perjury, right? We can't misstate. We can't knowingly misstate. We can make mistakes, but we can't do so purposefully or knowingly. And that's pretty much the request for the request for overpayment form. So again, you want to do both at the same time. Let's go to the next slide. You can see how easy it is to get in this pickle, can't you? And a lot harder to get out of it. But being responsive to Social Security is probably your best defense. I think where they go sideways is if they send out a request for an overpayment and crickets if you don't ever respond. Um, this extra form, the statement of the claimant, this is just a good form for any time that you're communicating with Social Security. I love sending correspondence back to Social Security on their own forms. It basically acts like an affidavit. It's basically a formal statement that you're making. So it's has just a little more significance than if you were just sending it on a piece of legal pad paper. So again, it helps Social Security connect the person with the Social Security number and what all are you trying to say. This is where you can provide a lot of information and a lot of backstory that you weren't able to do in like 3 or 4 lines on the form. So it's always appropriate if you have additional things to say to include this statement of the claimant or other person, or you as a rep payee. So I strongly endorse using that extra form. So what are just some good helpful tips as you're going through this? Again, don't assume that their information is accurate. Make sure that you've gone through and done a reconciliation between what Social Security has and what you have. You might find some misinformation. Sometimes when I'm going through those, sometimes I find mistakes that don't work in our favor, so I just kind of let that sleeping dog lie. But when I find mistakes that work in our favor, then I'm going to call those out and I'm going to put that on that statement of claimant form. Getting the benefits plan inquiry. So the benefits plan inquiry, because that is produced by Social Security, they're going to look at that as, okay, this is bona fide records. The other challenge is sometimes, again, there may be misinformation on the benefits planning query too. So just as a good guideline, anytime you are working as a Social Security beneficiary, keep track of your pay stubs, keep track of all of your earnings so that you can do a reconciliation, and you are more in control because you know kind of where you are in relationship to some of these rules, like that substantial gainful activity rule. So maintain that spreadsheet tracking gross earnings. We get in a situation sometimes as it relates to bonuses. Is a bonus count as earnings? The answer is it depends. What kind of bonus was it? During the pandemic, we saw a lot of companies providing stipends and bonuses, basically cost of living bonuses or COVID bonuses. Those are not countable income. That's like a true bonus. But if it's a performance based bonus, then it is countable income. And I think that's a big myth that's out there, that bonuses are never counted as earnings, and they are. If it's a team goal, and I've seen pay stubs where it's pretty clear on the face of the stub that this was a performance goal, then they're going to count that. And sometimes, unfortunately, that can be just enough to put somebody over that substantial gainful activity level. And if you're not showing implementation, like impairment related work expenses or job subsidy or accommodation and cost of those job accommodations, then guess what? You're over that SGA limit and you're going to be in this overpayment situation. Utilize a work incentive planning assistance counselor. In Georgia, we have 3 WIPA providers. BDI is one. We serve 54 counties, but we have 2 other providers that serve other counties. So make sure you utilize that WIPA provider to give you some guidance with some of these incentives. And there's the Ticket to Work helpline number. The only way you can get a WIPA provider is through the Ticket to Work helpline. We have a lot of folks trying to call BDI directly, and we have to take referrals from the helpline because the helpline has a screening function. So that's how we get our referrals. So make sure that you call that helpline to get that WIPA referral. And then make sure you've done your due diligence on knowing as much of the rules as possible. If you have a WIPA counselor and you're reviewing the red book, you're doing a really good job of staying aware of what some of these work incentives are. The red book, you can just Google Social Security red book and you can download that PDF. It's going to provide a list of those impairment related work expenses, and also is going to provide more information about what constitutes a job subsidy or other accommodations on the job. Talk to your employer if you're in a overpayment situation because you're over SGA, but you're getting some help on the job. A lot of times our employers, they think they're doing us a favor by paying us as much as they can, and that's great, but sometimes it can hurt us. So having a conversation with the employer to talk about maybe having a cap on your salary, or otherwise providing some assistance with completing paperwork to show that they're subsidizing, that can be another good strategy. And then of course providing that statement to Social Security. Tell your story. Don't be afraid to tell your story. Any questions? I know this is a lot. This is a hard topic. It was a very hard topic. So I'm going to open up the door to any questions that you might have. If you're a payee, do I put your name or his name? If the overpayment is in the name of the child, then that individual is the claimant, and then you would be providing your information as the person who's helping or that representative payee. Sometimes we've had situations where I've advised the rep payee to kind of fall on the sword, like, okay, I'm the rep payee. You can't hold him responsible because he needed a rep payee and I was a rep payee and I wasn't aware of the rules. So it's my fault. Don't hold him responsible because it's really my fault. And moving forward, now I have a WIPA counselor. Now I understand these rules. It'll never happen again. Again, think like traffic court that you're appealing to the judge. This is a one-time anomaly. It'll never happen again. We fixed it. Show that you fixed it if you can. If I have any situation where it's an SSI overpayment because they exceeded their resources, we try to fix it by setting up an able account so that then we can, in that statement, it's like, here's how we set up an able account, and now we're using an able account so we can always maintain our resources below that 2,000 mark. And every time that we've done that, Social Security is like, okay, cool, you know the rules now, awesome. So there are times in which we're successful with overpayments. There are times in which we're not successful in overpayments, but it's always a good idea to try. Let's see. I'm going in the chat to look at questions. How would someone report transportation expenses that don't utilize Lyft, MARTA, but only for mileage or gas money to the person transporting them? That's a tough one. There is a impairment related request form. So if you're going to go that route, I would suggest that again, anytime you can put something on Social Security's documentation, it just kind of eases it up a little bit. Social Security tends to not provide an impairment related work expense for transportation if it's a family member providing the transportation. Yeah. Um, So what do you do? If possible, if you can use Lyft or Uber, then do so because those receipts are pretty much almost always going to be counted. Whereas if the person is your family member, not so much. They're never going to reimburse gas money. Um, I've seen them utilize again that expense request, use like the national rate for mileage and try it that way. Yeah, especially, again in that statement. Remember that statement gives you an opportunity to say whatever. Like I live out in the boonies, okay? There's no lift here. So I've got to take them, and this is the amount of time, and this is the distance. And I've put in the request, here's your address, the point A to point B. So it's 21 miles. And so 21 miles at the national reimbursement rate, I think it's 61 cents a mile, equals whatnot. So I would try that. Let's see. My daughter receives SSDI, is married. From what I understand, that 1470 gross month is only considering her wages, correct? His wages are not reported. I need to check into that. I don't have that many clients who are married. There are separate rules. So let's double check that. So if you want to follow up with me separately, we can look into that. Scroll up and see if there are other questions. Social Security says I owe them back for the last 3 years and cut my SSI until my son turns 18. I did request reconsideration. Okay. Again, make sure that you're doing the request for reconsideration and the request for overpayment concurrently. That's going to be helpful. Are there any other questions? Want to make sure that y'all can access all these forms. A simple Google search will pull it up. Social Security, um, they put a lot of information on their own website. So if you put Social Security request for overpayment, you're going to get the whole site that explains the process and provides the forms for download. So there's an opportunity for you to complete all of that and get some good information at the same time. Any other questions? So again, just to recap, the best thing to do is avoid an overpayment situation simply by making sure that you're keeping track of all the earnings, that you are reporting those earnings each month. You're keeping an eye, especially if you have SSI, keeping an eye on the resource limits. Prevention, what's the saying? Ounce of prevention better than a pound of cure, or something along those lines. You really want to try to prevent an overpayment situation. If you get in an overpayment situation, follow through by doing that reconciliation and try to show that you are either making good faith in fixing the situation, or show that there's some errors, or otherwise, again, at the end of the day, if it is what it is, then you show the financial hardship. It's like, this is really going to hurt the person. Is age ever a consideration for the waiver? So let's say if the claimant is a minor, a minor by their very definition, they're having somebody who's making decisions for them. So are they capable of getting in this situation themselves? The answer is generally no. So you would basically put that in the statement. It's like, he's just a kid. It's the rep pays fault. I'm going to fall on the sword. I didn't understand the rules. We got ourselves in, and it's really, really easy, very easy to get into an overpayment situation with SSI when you have SSI for the minor child and then the parent is returning to work. You are almost always going to be in an overpayment situation. So again, it boils down to showing that financial hardship.
And Kathy, in the chat, did you have any questions? If so, you can unmute yourself and just ask it.
Good morning, everyone. I was trying to put it in the chat, but somehow I'm having problems. My question is this. What if you are receiving SSI or SSDI and you're being paid through a nonprofit organization to take care of someone? That's my question. How does that affect you?
So where it could affect is if the nonprofit is the employer. Is that correct? If the
Yes.
nonprofit is the employer, you've got a better chance than average of being able to show that the work has been subsidized. So what you want to look at is how much over substantial gainful activity were you? Are you like think about it. If you're $10 over, you can kind of like, come on, Social Security, it's $10. Maybe we didn't report it correctly, but it's just $10, versus $1,000 over. So you really want to do, first of all, a reconciliation so you can look at what were the gross earnings each month. And sometimes when I've done that, let's say if this is over the course of a couple of years, and again, this adds up fast, right? There are some months that if people are getting paid every 2 weeks, those 5-week months can be a killer, right? Because you're getting 3 paychecks instead of 2. And so we circle those. It's like the reason I was over month is because there were 3 pay periods in that month instead of 2. And so it really should be based on the calculation of 4.33 weeks versus this 5 weeks. So that would be part of the statement that you would make. So in your case, if the employer is providing some accommodations, we would want to document that and demonstrate the value of those accommodations, and basically make the argument that the value, even though it's above substantial gainful activity, the value is actually below substantial gainful activity.
Thank you.
Do they ever have the representative pay back money if you take the blame? No, they're not going to over from the claimant to the rep payee, the worst that could happen is they're going to say, no, I hear you, but the answer is still no. And the claimant is still stuck with that overpayment. So this is a hard topic. It really is. Somebody asked, how do I get a WIPA counselor? Make sure you call that Ticket to Work helpline to get a WIPA counselor. So I appreciate your time. I know this is a difficult kind of tickly subject. So, feel free to reach out for more in-depth review of your situation. We'll be happy to help in any way that we can. But generally, if you can just follow some of the tenets that we discussed today in terms of reporting, and I think what's critical is the one single most thing that can make a difference is if you're maintaining your own records so that you're keeping track. I think that is probably the single greatest thing that you could ever do to help.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anna, and thanks everyone for joining us. Just as a reminder, you will have access to the recording in the next several days. Also, you can contact us at empowers@bobbydot.org. And also, I posted Anna's direct email in the chat if you need to ask her any other questions. If you scan this code, it will take you to a quick survey that will show us how do you feel about today's session, and you have the opportunity to share your thoughts on the presentation and any topics that you want us to cover in any future sessions. And you can join us this Thursday, October 5th, for Job and Career Services webinar. And we will have a special guest from Georgia Vocational Rehab Agency, GVRA. And also our next session is on October 12th, where Anna will be talking about life care planning basics. So thanks again for joining us, and I hope to see you next time. And please follow us on social media. We're pretty active there. A lot of helpful tips. If you follow us, you'll see those from Anna every Tuesday. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.